Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly 90-minute deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
My name is Lisa. I'm a clinical psychologist and a college counselor. I am a parent of a boy in elementary school, a girl in middle school, and a girl in college. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University.
This week in the news, merit aid, or the lack thereof, makes early decision even murkier. A great article by Ron Lieber of the New York Times. Our question from a listener is bonus content week. Lisa looks at how accommodations for IEPs and 504 plans differ from college to high school. What you need to know to set your child up for a successful transition. Our interview is part 1 of 2 with Chris Gruber, the Vice President and Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Davidson College, on, quote, how the pandemic forced Davidson to examine its own admission biases and make changes. And our college spotlight is a great one, Understanding Danish Universities with international specialist Kevin Newton, part 1 of 2.
All right, my friend, we got a few announcements. This won't surprise anybody who heard our MIT interview, but MIT is breaking the trend. And so far, other than Georgetown, they are the only ones that have said they are returning to test scores. And those of you who listen know that I'm generally a supporter of the test optional movement. But in the case of MIT, I respect what they're doing 100%. In fact, here's what I put out on Twitter after the announcement was made. I said, all MIT students, regardless of major, must pass 2 semesters of calculus, 2 semesters of calculus-based physics, and all must pass challenging, fast-paced classes in calc physics, bio, and chem. MIT is an outlier. They've done studies, they've done research. Students have to have a high math score to excel in their very accelerated program, and all those math geniuses that they have all gathered in one spot. So in their case, I think it makes sense. So I'm supportive of that. They've done the research. No beef on my part here. And someone may think, hey, you're just saying that because you just interviewed them. You guys know me better than that. I shoot straight with you. For example, in that interview, they did not convince me, although they articulated it well, that the merits of them having their own application outweigh the extra work that they're putting on students. So I call balls and strikes the way that I see them. In this case, I think this makes sense for them.
Hey, it's MIT, man. Them going without SATs is like a music college admitting you without an audition.
You might have just come off the graveyard shift, man, but you came out whistling Dixie.
Absolutely. It's like an art major trying to evaluate your painting and he's blind.
Speaking about Dave, big announcement. So 2 weeks ago, I said, Dave, listen, you've been super dedicated to this podcast now. You came on episode 105, which was the start of year 3. You literally have missed 2 weeks. He missed 1 week to take Lauren back to Yale, and the other week he didn't even miss it. I just said, hey, it's your birthday, man. He had company coming in. I said, take your birthday off. But I see what my brother from another mother is going through here. You think he's just working these shifts 6 times a month. No, he's working 16 shifts. 16 shifts a month. And I joke around here, but he is trying to take over the city of Chicago with his growing real estate empire. And I know how much of a family man he is. So I said, hey, Dave, I know when Lauren comes back from college, you're going to want to spend a lot of time with her. How would you feel about moving to once a month just to accommodate some balance in your life? And why don't you comment, Dave? Speak for yourself.
Well, it's been a great odyssey. I know we've been with Mark from the beginning, and it's just a transition, which is great. Yep. But as you get older, you realize that your energy is a limited quanta. so coming off the shift, and it's not fair to the podcast not to give 100% all the time. So I'm still going to be involved, and I'm still going to give my contribution, but it gives an opportunity to involve a lot of great voices that Mark has accumulated over the years. So an exciting transition.
Yeah, and I think it's fantastic that Dave will continue to be on. We've known each other literally our whole lives. I think you're also going to be really excited about what we're going to do. We're going to have a new format. And you know me, I like to tantalize and just let it settle for a bit. Honestly, no, I'm just waiting to confirm a little bit of what the new host situation will be. And I just want to hold off, but I'll have that for you certainly in the month of April, possibly as early as next week. But certainly in the month of April, I'll be able to confirm what our format will be moving forward. And I think you guys will be excited about the additional voices that we'll bring your way. So thanks again, my brother. Thanks for your service. And I'm glad that you're still going to be with us.
I will still be around. I'll be lurking.
Now, another personal announcement. So Karis is moving back to Davidson, North Carolina. Boy, she just got that school in her blood. She loves that town. She's locked into a lease. She feels her Spanish tutoring business is at the point now where she can launch off and do her entrepreneurial thing. So happy for her, being completely transparent, and she knows this. I would have loved her to stay one more year. You know, she's teaching at the private high school that her and her sister graduated from, and they really, really tried hard to get her to stay. They upped the salary and threw all kinds of perks in her. But you know what? You got to let your kids chase their dreams, and she's determined. And so we support her 100%. So as of June 23rd, she'll be moving right back to that college town where she had her best 4 years of her life. And kind of exciting to see her chase her dreams. So
it's not too far from Atlanta to Davidson. What's
4 hours.
No.
4 hours. 286 miles to be exact.
She just flew to another tree. You could easily hang out there.
Yeah, you know, I was like, hey, why don't you stay another year? And, you know, you're living rent. Well, actually, to tell you the truth, they started charging her rent just because.
Oh, there you go.
Some skin in the game. I said, hey, you got to have some skin in the game. You know, you want to be an adult, we're going to treat you like that. But still, I mean, we weren't charging her anywhere near what she's going to be paying. And I would have liked to have seen her have $20,000 in the bank or something just for some rough times. But, you know, as a parent, you gotta let your kids go. But, you know, I will say this, you know, you joke around a lot and say, hey, you know, and your kid's coming back, living in your basement. Well, you know what? For a short period of time, it can really be good. They can do a lot to position themselves financially if they're doing an entrepreneurial venture or whatever they're getting started in their career. And it's kind of really nice being around your child after they've been away for college for a while. So my wife and I will always treasure I think it'll be about 15 months where we had Karis here. But you do have to let your kids go. They've got roots and wings. You got to go let them fly. Go let her do her Spanish tutoring thing. All right, Dave, admissions tip. So I am going to give you quite a few different tips over the next little while when it comes to essays, because this is the time when students work on personal statements. I know for all the students that we work with, from April 15th to June 15th, we're getting those puppies done. And so I'm going to give you several tips related to the essay. And the first one is make sure you don't just talk about your what, but your so what. So many essays have these great stories, but then the plane doesn't land and you're like, that was a great story, but what was the purpose of that? The so what, the why what you said matters. And the reflection is the power, the secret sauce. Make sure your essays get to the why, get to the so what. That's extremely important. And so many of them have these incredible stories, and that's all they are, incredible stories. Like, what was the purpose of this? So that's my admissions tip.
Yeah, it's like you got to tell why the chicken crossed the road. It can't just be to get to the other side.
Basically, that's your Dave's version, but that's true. All right, so admissions tip. The word is tag.
Tag.
Not tag as a kid where you're running around playing tag. Any idea what tag refers to, Dave?
Tag. Well, we know it. You go to a supermarket, you might see a tag
Here we
that
go.
tells you what you're buying, tells you the price of what you're buying. So in the college admission format, it probably refers to what the admission officers want to place on a particular applicant to indicate their interest and the category that they're going to place him at.
Let me just stop you right now, man, because you're so far out in left field. So tag is a term that I don't really hear this as much as I used to, but it's a euphemism for hook, which is a euphemism for institutional priority. And so, lots and lots of things, right? Alumni status, athlete, musician, high-level musician in the orchestra, all kinds of different things. Won't go through all of that.
That's what I said. That's what I said.
That's not what you said.
That is exactly what I said. Tag, it's like where you want to place him, this is your hook.
Okay. All right, self-grading. We'll give it to you.
Thank you.
All right, big number. Our big number. So a recent Inside Higher Ed Pulse survey of 2,000 college students said 25% are dealing with food insecurity. That's a high number, 1 in 4. And that was a survey, credible organization, 2,000 college students. So our big number is 25, but That's a big number when it's 25% dealing with food insecurity. Wondering where that next meal is sometimes coming from. All right, Dave, I do this every 5th episode. Stuck's Rant, Stuck's Raves, or, thanks to my daughter, what is grinding my gears out there? And one thing that is grinding my gears is how some colleges use student search. Our regular listeners will know student search refers to the process where schools buy lists of names from the ACT College Board and some other sources, but those are the main two. And then that's the way they can reach the masses of people to try to drum up apps. And I have no problem with student search. In fact, how else are you supposed to reach the entire country? No other method is going to fully do it. Can't visit every high school. You can't expect everybody to find you on your website. Can't, pop in and do a fair and think you're going to reach everybody or reception. So I get it, but I particularly don't like this, Dave, but I work with students that are getting lots of mail from schools that they are not really remotely that close to being competitive with as applicants. And I particularly felt the most highly selective because they know that if somebody gets a piece of mail from Prestige U, they're going to get that kid excited. And I had a mom say to me recently, I'm just starting to work with her. And she says to me, do you want to know the schools that are aggressively recruiting my kid? And I said, you mean the one sending you a lot of mail? She said, yes. I said, see, that's the problem. People think that they're likely to be admitted. And now here's the other side of it. In fairness to the schools, they don't know what your eventual academic record's going to be like. And so they're looking at things like maybe an 11th grade PST, a 10th grade PSAT, 9th or 10th grade AP. And they're like, okay, maybe this kid will blossom into a competitive applicant. But I think that the most competitive schools, they have to be more responsible and not sending. In other words, Harvard shouldn't be sending mailers to people that get 1250s on the SAT. Okay? Because now when I have to tell them I have not seen students I've worked with who have been admitted with your academic profile, unless it's a recruited athlete or something really, really unusual. Tag! I had to get it in there, dude. Now I'm like, okay, well, you're telling me that, but they're sending me mail, so thank you, but I'll believe them, not you. And it just makes for an ugly situation. So that's grinding my gears. Now, what's my rave? So CASE, and I haven't talked about CASE before, but CASE is an acronym for the Council of Advancement and Supportive Education. And they do the biggest, most credible, sophisticated, gold standard study every year of philanthropy to education. It's called their VSE survey. That's an acronym for Voluntary Support of Education. And they've been doing this since 1957, so that's not a joke. This is year 65. This year's study, over 864 participated, and here's the rave. $52 billion, Dave, went to colleges and universities by philanthropy this year. $52 billion. So people heard the cry that the pandemic is killing us, and they stepped up. For those of you who are anal, you want more data, 33.1% came from foundations, 23.2% from alumni. And by the way, the biggest increase in any one group was alumni. So you wonder why some schools don't want to give legacy admissions up? Why they'll die on that hill? Well, basically $1 in $4 came from alumni. And here's a real rave. 15 community colleges and 11 HBCUs received more than double than they had received the previous year. Now, that's largely thank you to Mackenzie Scott and Michael Bloomberg. And Michael Bloomberg, those two stepped up. There were 9 gifts of over $100 million this year to higher ed. So shout out there. Awesome. All right, Dave, take it away. We got a good article.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
It is by Ron Lieber of the New York Times, and it's entitled Merit Aid, or Lack Thereof, Makes Early Decision Ever Murkier. This is a great article. Ron Lieber starts out by profiling Northeastern, and it says that Northeastern will not estimate how much merit aid it might offer you. And he asked the question, can schools actually make you enroll if they don't give you enough money? Well, here's the problem. Ron Lieber says that in the world of college admissions and early decision, where you pledge to attend if a school offers you a spot, you don't always get to know ahead of time, and you don't get to know the differing discounts, how much the school is going to offer you. And this is a big problem if you're not sure if you can afford this school. And it really centers around this concept of early decision. The schools are asking you to make a pledge, make a commitment to them to attend, but they're not telling you if you can afford to actually pay it, because they're not telling you if you actually meet their needs blind criteria, how much they're going to give you with needs blind. They're not telling you how much they're going to give you in merit scholarships. It's like walking into a car dealership and being told that you must commit to buying a car on that floor, but they're not going to tell you the price tag of that car until you sign the purchasing contract. It makes no sense. So it starts off where he talks about Northeastern. That's a prime example of a popular school that does not always predict how much aid many applicants will get. And the amount can swing as much as $100,000 or more during the course of an undergraduate years. And he basically says that when he asked Northeastern, would it be fair for a student if they got into Northeastern and Northeastern could not commit to giving the money they need, if they actually turned them down, how they felt. And of course, the institution said, oh, you'd be breaking your contract. But the question is, aren't they breaking the contract to the student because they're not telling him what the upfront costs would be? And so he had a couple of suggestions. So the first problem that Lieber illustrates is that for students who honestly may not be able to pay, Northeastern does not let them know what their potential contribution will be to financial aid until they've committed. And it gets even murkier if you happen to be going for merit aid. And as Lieber points out, plenty of affluent families that don't qualify for need-based aid get merit aid anyhow. And, merit aid is important because even if you earn $300,000 a year, if you live in an expensive area, and all of a sudden you have to write a $75,000 check for tuition after taxes, your ability to pay for that institution is going to be as crucial on getting merit aid money as many other people getting need blind money. But once again, Northeastern and many other schools will not tell the applicants whether they will qualify for merit aid. And they have no metric that they can actually look on to actually see what are my chances of qualifying for aid if I get in. So a couple of things that they talk about is that there should be more transparency in the process, and that there should be things like net price calculators where people can actually get information about what their chances of qualifying for aid is. And then finally, the bottom line is if people can't afford to pay, they shouldn't be held to this binding agreement. And in fact, the truth is that those agreements aren't legally binding. That if a person gets into a school and can't afford to pay, that they are legally obligated to go if it's not within their ability to do so. So let me stop here, Mark, and get your input.
Yeah, so first of all, let me start by saying that we have shouted out Ron Lieber's work quite a few times, especially in the last few months. Particularly, I'm very, very grateful for the work he is doing at really trying to hold schools accountable to fully disclose what you'll have to pay in advance, rather than the system that we have right now, which is, we've talked about this multiple times, it's just insane. Nobody would ever buy a major purchase and have to be all the way deep into the commitment level before you find out the price tag. And so I'm calling him, Dave, the Ralph Nader of financial aid, and Dave knows what I'm referring to. But those of you know Ralph Nader before he went off the deep end in 2000 with Al Gore, and I won't get into that with the hanging chads. But back in the day, he came into prominence in 1965 with the publication of his best-selling book, Unsafe at Any Speed, and it was a highly influential critique of the safety record of American automobile manufacturers. And then after that, he had another publication called Unsafe at Any Speed. Nader led a group of volunteer law students that were called the Nader's Raiders to investigate the Federal Trade Commission, which literally led to the agency's overhaul and reform. And so in the 70s, he leveraged this whole position to be involved in a number of advocacy and watchdog groups. So he's kind of known as the number one consumer advocate and played that role in a major way. And that's what I see Lieber doing when it comes to holding schools accountable for transparency when it comes to pricing. And I support that 100%. I think it's fantastic what he's doing. And at some point I might even reach out to him and see if he wants to come on the podcast to go into, some deeper issues with him. So, and those of you who like what you see here, you can follow. He's got a column called Your Money for the New York Times. He's been doing this since 2008. He's the author of 5 books. And of course, we've talked quite a bit about his book and recommended it, called The Price You Pay for College. So kudos to all of that. Now, I agree with multiple points that Lieber makes here, but I don't agree with everything. So I'm going to walk you through with what I agree and what I disagree. What I definitely want to say that I agree with is one comment he makes in the article, which Dave mentioned, where he says, plenty of affluent families that don't qualify for need-based aid get merit-based aid anyhow. Many of them believe they can't afford the retail price without some merit aid. Cry me a river, but if you earn $300K and you live in an expensive area, writing a $75,000 check after taxes just may not be that easy. Schools know this, which is part of the reason most of them offer merit aid. I agree 100% with all of that. I agree that schools need to be more sensitive. A lot of them like to say, we meet full demonstrated need, implying to people, oh, just apply here, no problem. Dave, I did a session with somebody yesterday, pro bono session for a family. They make $119,000, and a school that claims that they meet full demonstrated need asked them to pay $39,000. And they're like, how am I supposed to come up with $39,000? This is somebody who applied ED, got in to a very highly, one of the 1%ers. I just don't want to put the school on blast. But was asked to pay $39,000. So they're like, no, I can't do it. So they're not going. So that's the kind of thing he's talking about. Now, just for those of you out there, like, is that really what happens? 119,000 results in 39,000. Remember, they also look at assets. So if you have a little bit of home equity, they're going to, factor that into what they ask you to pay as well. So I appreciate him drawing attention to that, because too many schools are going around saying, we meet full demonstrated need, so don't worry, just apply ED. Yeah, right. The formula is jacked up, and all the attention that can be brought to that formula being jacked up, don't even get me started. But one simple example is what's called higher cost areas. Okay, if you live in a higher cost area, an individual school, they may not factor that in at all. The FAFSA formula doesn't do it at all. And with the CSS profile, the most adjustment they can make is 20%. And many schools don't even do that. But tell me, Dave, the cost of living in Manhattan compared to maybe a place like, Kentucky or West Virginia, 20% more? I don't think so.
No.
So don't get me started on that. So I agree with that point. Another point he says I agree with, accuracy is important. So he says he talks about how Northeastern says they give merit aid to the top 10 to 15%. But you can just go right in. You can go to section H21 in a common data set, or a simpler way of doing it is just go to collegedata.com and hit the financial tab, and it will tell you right in there the percentage of students that got merit aid from each school. By the way, for Northeastern, it's 41.4, and the percentage of people that got merit aid that had no financial need at all, which was 30.4%. Average award, $19,927. So his point is, why are you saying you give it to 10 to 15% when I can clearly look at data to say that that's wrong? Now, I agree with him. Schools need to be more accurate, but I also cut schools a little bit of a slack there. A little bit of, listen, most schools would love to tout that they give it to more people. I think that was just some disconnect between whoever wrote the website not having all their ducks lined up in an order. So that's a accuracy issue. But I cut them a little bit of slack, and he said they corrected it when it was brought to their attention. Now, one more point I agree with him on. Here's what he says, as long as we're stuck with this highly imperfect system, schools should say what percentage of students get merit aid in the early decision round. Agree 100%. There's no reason why that has to be secretive, and that a school can't say this is the percentage of people who get merit aid in the ED round. They're asking for a binding commitment. They can reveal that. And so I agree 100%. There can be more transparency there. He says all schools should say what percentage of the overall class gets merit aid. And some do that and some don't. And so for those who don't, I agree more transparency should be there. And so those are the areas that I agree with him on. Now, here's a pretty big area where I disagree with him. So he talks about a conversation that he has with Sundar, and sorry, Sundar, I'm probably going to butcher your name, and I'm going to do my best. Sundar Kumarasamy, who's Northeastern's Vice President of Enrollment Management. I have never met him. I don't know him, and I probably jacked his name up, but it wasn't intentional. And he has this conversation with him, like, why are you not telling people how much money they're going to get in merit aid when they apply ED? And this is my problem with this, Dave. To me, assembling a class is similar to like if you were building a company. If you were building a company, would you want to just hire employees off of just test scores? Of course not. You would want to check their references. You want to interview them. You might want to have them write some short answer questions. And so colleges that do holistic admissions, they have the right to build their class, and money is an enrollment management tool. They have a right to build their class off looking at things like personal qualities, different aspects of diversity, how different people will come together and create the best community. And they have a right to do that. And so he pushes back Sundar pushes back with him in the conversation, and he says, how would a student who has an art portfolio compete with a person who knows math and science, how tests work? And now, in fairness to Lieber does say this is a reasonable but frustrating. So he does give lip service to the point. Okay, I get your point. You're saying, how could we possibly tell you how much merit aid you're going to get in advance when we haven't even studied all of the holistic factors we use, such as interview notes, essays, personal qualities, teacher recommendations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, different aspects of diversity. And so he says that's a reasonable argument, but then he really just gives lip service to it because he then really goes on to extol other schools. He says, Oberlin College estimates merit aid with their net price calculator. Wabash College and the University of Alabama display merit aid. Yeah, but these are schools that are doing it by the numbers. And so I disagree with him on that. I do not think you can expect a school to give merit aid exact figures when they haven't even gotten to know an applicant at all. Does that make sense, Dave, or not?
It does make sense, but it does show how the institutional policies exacerbate the socioeconomic divide.
I agree.
Because it makes sense. But the bottom line is for 80+% of people in this country, probably 90%, you simply can't commit to a six-figure obligation without knowing exactly what the cost will be. And that pretty much negates early decision for the vast majority of not just the working poor, but the working middle class. So I can see
Well,
why
Dave, it's not
so
just working middle class. I mean, I have double doctor families I work with that can't do ED because you got to remember, like, people live in high-cost areas. They might have their kids in private school. They may have 3 kids, may have 4 kids. And so they're what they do for one, they want to do for all of them. And then a lot of times they're also thinking about grad school or professional schools. So now I'm glad you pushed back on that, because we did just talk about this a couple of weeks ago when we talked about should merit aid be, or should ED be eliminated based on the legislation that's going through New York, right? And we took the position that, I think that we should, because it is completely not fair to families that need to look at money, which is the overwhelming number of people. So I start out with that fundamental understanding that, I think early decision, you should not be able to get federal money and do something that so biases one social class, right? But I also think that you can't expect a school to just give away tens of thousands of dollars to people that all they know about you is a GPA and a test score.
So let me push back on you a little bit further on that.
Okay.
I think a greater emphasis has to be made that if you are going to demand that people give you their allegiance, then you really need to open up the pocketbook and really make sure that they can truly afford it. Not like, afford means that you have to mortgage your house and sell all your cars and never go on another vacation other to the Walmart parking lot. I mean, the fact is that the financial disparities are so great that they're going to push the political system to outlaw ED if they don't make some pretty dramatic changes.
Sure. Now, let me tell you what some of those schools have done. Now, this is an extreme because not many have the money to do it. This is extremely expensive. Harvard, literally, if you make under 75, you pay 0. Stanford, you make under 75, if you pay 0. And up to incomes of $160,000, you pay 10%. So a family that makes 100, and that same family I told you about, that one school asked to pay 39, they would have paid 11,900. And I told that to the mom, because the kid was extremely strong. And they're like, wow. So, those schools have put millions and millions and millions into need-based aid. And that's a second thing. Now, this is a little bit of me nitpicking, but I really respect the work Lieber's doing. I'm following him because I agree with him so much in trying to get these schools to tell people, what the cost is before you commit. I'm talking about primarily, most people don't apply ED. But he's always talking about the family that makes $200,000 to $300,000 has to pay $75,000, which is great. And I get that's his audience with the New York Times. It's their listenership. What I don't hear him talking about is an increase of need-based aid with the same degree of fervor and passion. There's one pot of money out there. In our big number, we said 25% of kids are food insecure. If he's as successful as he is at trying to get schools to give merit aid, and I've seen him, he's really effectively pressuring other schools, like Carleton is one he's spoken out about. Let's see how long they can hang in there and not give merit aid. You're going to see the food insecurity numbers go from 25% to 35%. I would just like to see him also be as passionate about schools increasing their need-based aid. And that's just a little bit of a minor quibble, but we've had now 20-year trend of schools shifting their money away from need-based to merit-based. And you're going to just, you talk about locking out the middle and the upper middle, you're going to completely lock out families that don't have substantial resources from these schools if we don't increase our need-based aid. So that's just a little minor thing. The third thing that I disagree with him on is, he says it's wrong for schools to say that it's binding, that and he says they need to stop saying this. Well, I just think he confuses morally binding with legally binding. Nobody says it's legally binding. Everybody's clear that it's not legally binding. It's just morally binding. You have a school counselor that signs, a parent that signs, and a student that signs. So there's a difference between morally binding and legally binding. Look, I don't want to defend a practice that I fundamentally believe is flawed, but I just think that that's just incorrect language to say that it's not binding, and people need to stop saying that it's binding. And then, he gives an example, and I feel for people because it has to be confusing. So he gives an example in this article from Connecticut College. And Connecticut College actually makes a statement. Andy Strickler, who we've talked about several times on the podcast here, where they actually say, I'll read it. Any student who applies, is admitted ED, and finds the financial aid award need or merit-based to be unreasonable has every right to withdraw their application. Okay? Now, they're one of the very few schools that would say that. Most schools would say, do our net price calculator, and if you're not comfortable with what it says, then you shouldn't apply ED. You may remember when I had Michael Ireland on, interviewing him about financial aid about Smith. And he said, if money is a major concern, honestly, if you're going to be concerned about our calculator being off a few $1,000s, probably shouldn't just apply ED. So, look, we know ED has its flaws, but I don't think it's reasonable to expect every school to do what Connecticut College is doing. As long as you have an ED system, it only works in the ability to help colleges please all of their different stakeholders and have a balanced class. If literally they had to have the caveat, if you're not happy with your merit-based award, then get out of it. It literally would have no practical value at all. And maybe you should argue, well, if you don't believe in it, then why don't you want to blow it up any way that you can? And I can see that argument. Does that make any sense, Dave, or not?
It does. It does. Absolutely.
And so, but I feel for the consumer, because you see something like that and you think, hey, if Connecticut College can do it, why can't everybody else? Or is that how this really works? No, that is not how this thing works. I mean, we've talked about how hard it is to not under-enroll or over-enroll. We've talked about how hard it is to please all the stakeholders you have to. Schools use this, and they'll fight and they'll die on this hill. But overall, I want to just shout him out again. I just wanted to bring out both sides of it because I agree with some things and disagree, because what he's doing is he's being a watchdog for schools to have more transparency with pricing, and he's exposing how much ED really caters to affluent families that don't need to look at money at all. And for that, I want to, highlight him and say, you go, guy. Any final thoughts, Dave?
No, I think you've hit it on the head. I think it highlights another reason why I agree that ED is probably going to have a time limit on it. And, we haven't mentioned when 15-20% inflation starts kicking in and people realize that, it's a 4-year commitment, but you don't know whether the yearly prices are going to increase 5%, 10%, 20%, where 400,000 might turn into 500,000. When you factor in inflation, it makes that early decision even more precarious. So, yeah, I think it's well.
Well, you know what it is, Dave. Your brand just has to be really strong. I'm telling you, Harvard and Stanford could flip their price to $120,000 overnight, and you'd still see they'd have really low acceptance rates and tons of applications. They just would. There's that much money in certain pockets in this country and international. But it's very, very hard for some other schools. I won't name names. I did it a little bit 2 weeks ago when I said I'm very respectful of what F&M is doing. They're concerned about the fact that 25% of kids are food insecure, and they're concerned about that kid and charting a course for kids who can change their whole trajectory of their life and making college affordable for them, and not just. They're like, I'm sorry that you may have to go from 3 cars to 2 or maybe 1, or you might not be able to do the $10,000 vacation. You might have to do the $1,500 vacation, but you'll still find a way to make it. This other kid here literally won't go to college. It's a tricky thing. There's one pot of money. I'm overall pro merit aid because the formula is literally so jacked up, but I'm really torn because every time you throw money into merit aid, you're taking money away from need-based aid, and I'm in one of the 2 states in the country that doesn't provide any state need-based aid, and I see how devastating that is for under-resourced families affording college.
Very good.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Friends, it's an even week, week 220, and that means bonus content. And for those of you who are new, Lisa and I do bonus content every 5 weeks. We alternate. So each of us has our own subject matter expertise. And Lisa, what do you have for us today? Take it away.
Oh, thank you. Today, I would like to talk about how accommodations for IEPs or 504B plans differ in college or university settings from high school, and how you can learn about that and make and plan your transition so that you'll be the most successful when you
That's
go
great.
to college. Yeah. So, and there are a lot of differences, and I was not aware of this until my daughter was getting ready to go to college. And then it was like, oh gosh, we have to figure out how to do this differently again.
That's
But
why our kids are like the best learning laboratories for those of us who have them. We learn from all of them.
very unfortunately for them, I think sometimes. First off, just to review, there are two types of accommodation plans that kids have in high school. The first one is an IEP, which is an individualized education plan. And that involves providing children with accommodation, but also allowing the school to change either the content of the class or the expectations in the class or the course along with having the accommodations. And that is covered by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or known as IDEA. There's also the 504 plan, 504B, and that allows students to have accommodations to access the curriculum, but there's no change in the content or the expectations of the class. And that is covered by the American Disabilities Act and the 504B Act. So those are the two kinds of accommodations that your child could have in high school. And I do just want to take a brief aside to talk about this, something that's sort of been on my heart recently. If you are a parent and you have a kid who you think needs any kind of accommodation, and you approach the school about it, and they say, I'm very sorry, but little Julia isn't going to qualify for accommodations because she has above average grades, which I think is something that a lot of people hear. That is completely wrong. It is against the American Disabilities Act, and it is also against the U.S. Department of Justice interpretation of that act. And so I know I've experienced this. I know.
Yeah, I was going to say, didn't this happen to you and you became Tiger Mom and got it fixed?
Oh, yes. And it happened again this week to me with Thomas. And I wasn't even really requesting a 504B plan, but he has terrible handwriting. And I sort of threw that out as one of the options for him. And so they had the 504 person call me, and she said, oh, well, Thomas is an above average student, so we would never accommodate him. And I was like, oh, no, you didn't. I said,
do you think they just don't know?
No, they know. They know. It's a gatekeeper thing. They don't want to deal with it. It's like their reflexive answer. And I don't understand the psychology behind this, but it seems to be no. I would think like you could go to a school person and you say like, my kid has a problem. They're like, oh dear, how can I possibly help? That is not the response that you get. And so anyway, I told the woman, who's very nice, you and I know both that's not true. We both know that's not true. She's like, yeah, well, the district has made the decision to do it this way.
Oh, wow.
And so I got kind of annoyed, and I emailed the superintendent, and I got a lot of phone calls today where they were backing up all over themselves, saying the district doesn't really.
They're messing with the wrong person, Miss Psychologist. You know these rules.
Well, honestly, it's not so much for my kid, but I think like there are people who haven't had my experiences. They're not a psychologist. They don't have like a big mouth and argumentative personality. What's happening to these kids? And I was like, you know what? I'm all y'all's mom today. I'm going to go.
No, I can relate to that. There's times when I feel a principle so strongly, and I feel like I'm speaking for all the people that will come behind me, not just the one individual instance. I can relate. Yeah. I
just want to say that if you get pushback like that because your kid is above average in anything, that's not a case. And the U.S. Department of Justice specifically states this. So the thing is that child might do well, but it might take them so much effort, right? It takes them so much more time, effort, mental load. And so they deserve to be accommodated for that. And also, if you say get your kid a tutor and that brings them up to the level, they can't consider that modification that you made. They have to look at the baseline. So that's another way that they try to get out of it. And like I said, I do not understand that mindset, but it does exist. And it is a federal
good
law.
thing they have their psychologist turned lawyer advocate.
Yeah.
Because when you get going, you don't have to say this. This is a little side. So I was talking to this family this week, and we were talking about a bunch of college stuff. Then I remember they were podcast listeners. And so I started it made sense to use the example of like the whole thing with Connecticut and the test optional, because that was the context. I said, did you hear that? They said, yeah, I heard that. You and Lisa were fighting each other.
Oh, well,
But then she said, I really liked it a lot. So then I didn't feel so bad. So I just say that to say, I know that Board of Education, they had their hands both you.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just it just bothers me because I think they're taking advantage of people's naivete, and I honestly didn't know that until I consulted a lawyer back in the day, and he was like, "Oh no, and he showed me right where I can look and right where I can quote it." So, just a public service announcement to
That's important. I'm glad you spoke up on that.
Your kid or your neighbor's kid, or you have a younger kid that's coming through the process. Just remember that. So, all right. Well, assuming you've been through all that, you've gotten your kid the perfect educational plan, either an IEP or a 504. What happens when they go to college?
Can I ask a question before college?
Yeah.
So, because you brought up, Thomas's handwriting, and I think a lot of people may not even know some of the different things that could qualify for a 504 or an IEP. Can you mention some that?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's anything that can interfere with like daily activities as it relates to school, like thinking, learning, listening, and writing. And so, I mean, with Thomas, like, his handwriting is not only terrible, it's very slow. And so what happens is he doesn't want to even think about writing a long sentence. It's just like he's like, oh God, no, I don't even want to like put 3 adjectives in that thing, and so I think it's inhibiting his ability to learn and to write.
So if somebody is suspicious that they think there might be something like that, but they're like, I'm not an expert. Like, what do you recommend as sort of their steps to kind of find that out? Because they just have a thought as a parent, but they're not really sure.
Yeah, it really kind of can depend on what it is. So if it's like something where you think like your child might have a learning difference, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia. I mean, you could always first start off talking to your pediatrician. You could pursue a neuropsychological evaluation. Sometimes insurance pays for those. Sometimes they don't. You can request as a school to evaluate your student. But again, the word on the street is you want your own evaluation first, because guess what? The school is maybe not going to be like looking under every rock for every problem that child might have. They're trying to prove it's fine, right? It's fine. And so that, again, here's a disadvantage to someone who doesn't have good health insurance or some extra cash to pay out for these things. And then, but like you can, if it's something like anxiety or a medical issue, of course, your pediatrician is a great place to start, and they can help you with that. So yeah, it's kind of like, I think, consulting your medical professions. I think educating yourself. If you think your kid has maybe attention deficit disorder, start reading about it. That's you can't look in someone's brain and test for that. That's a observed phenomenon, but if you kind of know what all the symptoms are, how it looks in girls, how it looks in boys, you can start to kind of say like, yeah, I think that might be an issue, and then pursue an evaluation.
I think that's helpful, because I think some people might be, oh, this is great because you're a psychologist and you know all this stuff and this is your area of expertise. But I'm just like a parent who doesn't know anything. I mean, not right. Anything, but
Yeah, but and then like I said, that's why I was thinking today, like, yep, I'm all y'all's mom. I'm going to tell you all how to do this because
Well, let me be quiet and let you do your thing.
Yeah. So, but anyway, getting accommodations. I mean, you and I could probably talk about that for years and never go over the same subject twice. But the really main difference between high school and college is that in high school, you're covered by the IDEA Act. So that provides your IEP. That goes away in college. And in college, you're only covered by the 504B provision. So that means that colleges don't have to provide the same levels of support and services that your high school does. They don't have to provide tutoring. They don't have to provide specialized instruction. They don't change the curriculum or the content many times or the expectations. And so it's a different level of accommodations, and it's lower level of accommodations. And in addition, they don't try to identify problems. So theoretically, your school is supposed to say, I think little Johnny has an issue, and start investigating it, right? The college doesn't, they are not going to look at little Johnny's issue. Or in this case, now he's big Johnny. They're not going to look at that. If Johnny is having academic problems, I think that's on Johnny. Like, they're just like, sorry, Johnny, you're on academic probation now. They're not going to look into the reasons why. So that's one thing. They're not going to look. And secondly, they're not going to identify your kid. So your kid is going to have to self-identify with the school. So when you get accepted to a school and you decide to matriculate at that school, you have to register with their Office of Disability Services and request accommodations. And you have to usually then provide documentation. Some schools, I think I've heard in the past, have required people to get new neuropsych evaluations, but there's been a movement away from that because it is expensive. And again,
yeah, I remember what they used to
equity,
cost.
Yeah,
like back in 2005. So I can't even imagine.
They have not gotten cheaper.
Yeah, I can imagine, because just when I worked at a high school, we used to require them for certain kids to go get one, and then they were a nice chunk of cheese back then.
No, and so that's thousands of dollars, and so now and I think there was a law, I think in the Senate, U.S. Senate, where they're trying to just regulate that schools had to accept a 504B plan or IEP plan from a high school and not require those things. And I think you don't generally hear as much about schools requiring that testing, although I suppose they could. So you register, you bring in all of your documentation from high school. And then the school will determine what kind of accommodations that you might be eligible for. So the thing for that is that there's nobody looking over this. There's no one making sure you get your accommodations. The student has to do it. And so the thing is that students have to learn to advocate for themselves in terms of getting services or accommodations that they need in college. And so the school's not going to do it. They generally don't like to talk to the parents about it. And so the student has to start learning how to be assertive and ask for what they need. And generally, it's suggested that like 18 months before they go to school, you should start trying to really encourage that in your student and start trying to transition some of the responsibility from the school or the parent to the child. So that's not another adjustment that they have to go through when they're like living independently. And there's all these other, wonderful things happening.
And I know we talked about this in the past, Lisa, for anyone who has learning differences or emotional mental barriers, evaluating the support services that the school has should be a really big part of the school that you ultimately select. Yes. I know we kind of fast forwarded all the way till you're there now, but knowing that we're speaking to a lot of parents with high school kids, that's like a huge part. And, we talk about customizing your tours, customizing your visits, making it a custom visit. Like, that's important to you. You should be having meetings on your visits to meet with the school to see how they handle learning differences and support services that are there. Yeah.
There is a tremendous amount of variation in the level of support among schools. And I mean, when I took my learning disabilities classes in the IEC course, I was astounded. They would make us go, compare this to school to that school. And you'd be like, whoa, you would think that two like similar institutions could have such different attitudes. And it's not always what you would expect. Some of the large state schools have the best resources, but also some of the small private schools have the best resources. And it's not always where you would think. So it's really important to investigate that. And different schools might have accommodations that work particularly well for certain types of emotional issues or, learning differences as well. Some schools have more support programs, or it might be like an extra charge for that, where they provide professional tutors or, executive functioning coaches, academic coaches, and things like that. Or, if a child is autistic, they might provide support and help that helps a child transition. Other places, it's just kind of bare bones. Like these are your accommodations. And, there's not really a lot of support. You might have some peer tutors that are offered, a writing center, but if you want anything else, then you probably have to go privately to get that kind of support. So another thing that you should know is that when your child goes to school and they're over 18, then you lose your immediate access to having any information about their grades or what's going on with their accommodations. So unless they waive their FERPA rights and their HIPAA rights, which I really do encourage if you're paying for college, that's my condition. Like I'm writing the check, I get to see full disclosure.
Yeah, I did the same thing for both my kids. Sorry.
You waive everything. Yeah. And so, but you really need to have your child waive that, because otherwise they won't talk to you about things. And if your child starts having problems at school, they can't talk to you about it without the child's permission. So that can be a real problem. So that's something that I think needs to be a discussion.
Can you give our listeners a quick overview of the difference between FERPA and HIPAA?
Right. Well, FERPA is a law about information regarding grades and financial things. I think maybe discipline reports. Right. HIPAA is, the Health Insurance Portability Act. So it's more about health information, as relates to their disability that they're getting accommodations for.
So most of this would fall under HIPAA, probably.
Yeah. Yeah. But also FERPA.
Both. Yeah.
So, students in college really choose whether or not they're going to use those accommodations. They might get letters to give to professors, but they may choose to never give them to the professors. That's their responsibility to inform professors about what they need. No one's following up and saying like, oh, that Professor Smith, he didn't let her have her note taker in there again. That's kind of on the student to make sure that happens and to, be assertive when it doesn't happen. So it's a really different ballgame. It requires a lot more independence on the part of the student, which I guess is developmentally appropriate in some ways. To be honest, though, with some of these, issues that kids go with, I feel like it's part of their, like if you have executive functioning issues, and that's part of why you need accommodations. And then you're supposed to like be on top of all your accommodations and always know like that you have to have this documented or that documented, and your parents are out, you didn't waive your FERPA or HIPAA, so they're like, they can't help you with that. I feel like that's a little bit of a rough transition. I think that's like a big ask on the part of schools.
Do you think in general, students that have, I'll use this word, significant learning differences, a lot of times they'd be better in smaller environments than large? Or
well, you would think so, but then again, like the University of Arizona, for example,
right, they've
huge
got their
school,
South Center. Yeah,
they have fantastic resources. So it could be that a smaller place might be good for a lot of them, but not always.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, because Arizona's as good as it gets. Yeah.
Yeah. Or like DePaul is a big school, but they have excellent learning support. Again, you wouldn't necessarily expect that because it's kind of like a school. It doesn't have a real campus and where are the classes and where's the housing, but yet they do really a good job of providing that. So that's why you have to really research it.
I kind of knew it was too simple of a question. It is not one of those things that just fits into like black and white categories.
Easy questions.
Don't get used to them.
No, I will not get used to them. And I would say that like schools, can be difficult about granting students accommodations. At Elon, they're doing this thing now where they just took preferential scheduling away from everyone and said you have to requalify. And so, because they said 40% of the student body was getting preferential scheduling, so it was meaningless. Well, okay, I can see that. So, but then, so Lily submits her request And, her condition, ADD, doesn't like change. It's not like, it like goes away. So it's all the documentation that she had before is the same. And they were like, no, you need to go to the doctor and get more documentation. And honestly, I think that's a gatekeeper move. Like they think that we're just, oh, that's a lot of trouble. Now we got to go call the doctor. But you know me, like I'm on it.
Yeah, I know you.
I'm not going to let that go by because, she needs it. She has a very hard time getting up early in the morning, and an 8 a.m. class would be like, that would be a disaster at this point. It's sad that that's the case, but it's true. So to take that away from her, that's going to impede her ability to learn. And I'm kind of irritated with them about that. But, that's where the advocacy comes in. And where the student has to really be on top of that.
Well, we know you're like the world's biggest student advocate. And so we know for your daughter, you're going to be like white on rice.
Well, yeah, but I mean, she's got to read her email and bring it to my attention. It's not like they emailed me, so she's got to be like, oh, that's weird. I mean, there's a lot of steps that have to happen. I think there's going to be some kids who are going to fall through the cracks on that. And that's going to be unfortunate. It seems like there had to be a better way.
So is there, what can parents do? Like you've kind of already shared some things. Evaluate the center, get the HIPAA and the FERPA signatures. So those are things you're telling parents to do. Are there any other things parents can do?
Well, I think that when you are getting your documentation ready, if you've got your plan with the accommodations, I would go back to maybe your pediatrician or a medical professional and really sit down with them and say, like, this is what I think my kid's going to need, and have the kid participate. Yeah, I definitely need that. No, I don't need that. Here's why. And then have that medical professional write a very detailed letter saying this student medically requires this accommodation, that accommodation, because then it's much harder to say like, oh, your doctor, yeah, we don't believe them. Yeah, you got this, no, but who cares, right? They kind of have to take it more seriously. And if they're going to say no, they know it's going to be a battle. So I think, and it's just good anyway to really think about what do we need? Because the school is not going to think for you about what you need. Like you might, at some of these IEP or 504B plans, there are a lot of professionals like, maybe we could try this or let's do that. That's not happening at college.
And I know one thing you can do. I'm big on like randomly talking to strangers, but in this case, this is on the front end before you enroll. Mm-hmm. Whether you're working with the Learning Center, asked to talk to some parents who have kids. And I know that they would, of course, they couldn't just randomly give you names without their permission, but I'm sure there'd be some that would be willing to talk to help someone.
Right.
I think talking to some parents and getting some straight talk about their experiences would be a good thing to do on the front end.
Yeah. And that's where like Linda's idea of joining Facebook groups that apply to the institutions you're interested in would be really helpful. I know Elon has a Facebook group for parents of kids who are, getting disability accommodations. And that, would be a great place to like, hey, what's the pro tips around here? What have you had problems with? What's gone well? And to find that out.
No, I'm really glad you brought that up. And for those of you who are wondering what Lisa's referring to, Linda Depker was a parent who was on a few months ago. You can just look it up if you just go to yourcauseboundkid.com and just type the word Linda, Lynda, in the search bar. If you didn't hear that interview, I'd strongly recommend it. It has ramifications for everybody, not just people with learning differences.
Right. No. And I think, you could insert any specialized topic here, right, and get information about that. And parents are usually pretty, willing to help prospective parents. And
that would be a great place to find people. It'd be a lot easier than asking the Learning Center if they could give you some parents, which they may not want to do, and and the confidentiality and. I mean, they would almost, if they have some volunteers that have said, listen, if anybody needs to talk to me, that's one thing. But if they don't have that situation, you could really run into a lot of red tape that way. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I think, it's just a process. You probably have to expect there's going to be some bumps in the process. And it's a good opportunity to learn how to advocate for yourself as a kid. It was funny because I was talking to Lily tonight before we got on, and she's like, what's up with you? And I'm like, oh God, I'm in the worst mood because this happened. She's like, oh gosh, here we go again. She's like, but Mom, I learned how to fight for myself in that process. I went to that meeting, and Lily did. She had like a list of legal cases, and she made sure she said, I need to read
she's
this into the
definitely,
record.
I know she's your child.
Well, she's very, Lily's all about protecting Lily, but, she said that she learned how to construct an argument that was logical to like get what she needed, and that she has used that skill many times. And she's like, Mom, send me your email. I want to see it, so that I can, I just want to learn how you're doing this. And so I thought that was a really good moment, like now it was painful while it was happening, but now we can, laugh about it.
Well, it's also good because I'm sure like with the Lily in 11th grade wouldn't have done that. So you just to see her own growth and to know that people like students can get to the point where they can advocate.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, 11th grade Lily went from like 0 to 60 on that one, I have to say, because she knew like she was not, if she did not get those accommodations, it was not going to go well for her, and she needed them. So, I guess what I always say, people grow because they have pain and suffering and anxiety and fear, but it's not the best way, but that seems to be the way that it happens. So it is a growth opportunity for your family, for your child. And it's part of the process of sort of handing off their life to them. And a lot of times if you have a kid who has, some special needs, it's really hard to do that. Even if they're fine, it's still hard to do that as a parent.
I'm going to put you on the spot, Lisa. If somebody has a question that's a listener that they wanted to ask you, would you be comfortable sharing your email?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, it's just lisa@schoolmatchforyou, and the number 4.com.
Yep, foryou.com. So I knew you'd say yes, otherwise I wouldn't have asked you.
Yeah, and if you, parents, if people are telling you that your kids are not eligible for services, because they have good grades, I've got some stuff to send you that might help.
So
with that.
reach out to Lisa for that one too. She's got some ammunition.
It will make me feel good to do that. So
awesome. Well, this is great. Anything else you want to share? This has been amazing.
No, I mean, I think like do your research and be prepared with that doctor's letter to send off right before you send it in. Have an appointment, write everything down, and I think that'll stand you in good stead.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm already looking forward to what you have for us 10 weeks from now.
Oh, I have to figure that out.
Oh, you got 10 weeks.
So it goes really fast.
That's true. Thanks again.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, you're really in for a treat. Chris Gruber is considered one of the deans of deans, 37 years of admissions experience. Multiple people who I've interviewed have said they look up to him. He's somebody they call. He's helped them along the way in their path. And so he's one of the giants of the profession. And in the next 2 weeks, I'll just be talking about Chris and the work that Davidson College has done at taking a look at their own personal biases that they've had, looking themselves right in the mirror and saying, how can we change to be more sensitive to the needs of students? Listen and enjoy. Friends, I am here with Chris Gruber, Dean of Admissions at Davidson College. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, Chris.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks. I've been looking forward to this.
I've been looking forward to this since our very first episode, and I didn't want to have you on because, Anika, original co-host, had a kid at Davidson. Karis was at Davidson. I didn't want people to think you're trying to promote Davidson too much. So I said, I'll lay low for a few years.
You are. So, as you should be.
Well, we had David Jelenas on, so, we had to go for David. But
That's right. That's the sexy stuff with financial aid. Now we move on.
Yeah, I think most people wouldn't call it sexy, but that's a nice way of putting it. But thank you so much for coming on, Chris. It's a real pleasure to have you here. And why don't you start by giving us your backstory?
Sure. I am originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I went to Virginia to go to college. Left there, worked in Philadelphia for about a 4-month period of time. I returned to my alma mater and worked there for almost 20 years in college admission and came to Davidson in 2005. And have had the good fortune of working in enrollment management here for the last 17 years, which has just been an absolute joy and an honor in terms of working for this college and promoting. I'm a survivor of the college admission process 3 times over with my own kids, where I knew absolutely nothing as they navigated it on their own. And I've got 2 that are out, both school teachers, one in your neck of the woods, Mr. Stucker, in Atlanta, one in Idaho, and a college junior right now as well. So my wife and I have been very, very fortunate to live in and work in great places.
Well, we have a lot in common. I was in Philly from 95 to 09. And Karis, who's the graduate of Davidson College, is both a Spanish teacher here at a private school in Atlanta, as well as she has a growing Spanish tutoring business. So, but she will forever be grateful to Davidson, and my Nietzsche and I will forever be grateful to Davidson. So whatever role you played in giving her the thumbs up, we will forever.
It takes a village, my friend. It takes a village to do all of this work, and I'm surrounded by fantastic people that had strong voices. So we all do it together, and that's the best part of our work. As you know, we've done this a long time.
Awesome. Well, it's nice to see someone in the trenches for 30 plus years still going strong. So there's your group is dying off, either flipping to the other side of the desk or retiring or doing something.
That's right. That's exactly right. I hope I got a few more in me.
Yeah, great. Well, let's transition to our topic. Our regular listeners know that I always ask our thought leaders, this is my name for you guys, thought leaders. I always ask our thought leaders, what's on your heart? What would you like to discuss? And I could not have been happier with Chris's approach. First of all, you took a long time. You said, let me think about it, and set another meeting up with you in a month. So no one's ever done that. I said, he's putting a lot of time into this. And then we had a second meeting, and Chris said, what do you think about looking at our biases? We're in the process of doing a reboot, asking ourselves, do we have blinders? Are there things we are not seeing that we should see? Does that mean people are slipping through the cracks that should be here that are not here? And we're evaluating all of our systems. Can we talk about that? And I said, can we ever? What a great topic. So why don't you start off by just telling how this conversation emerged within Davidson's admission office.
Yeah, Mark, I don't think there's in the work that we're doing. Come on, let's bounce back just for a second. Go back 18 months. Here we are thinking we're going to be departing our office for a week or so, and this strong wind will come by and this will blow over. It didn't happen. So the way in which we did our work in order to achieve the outcomes that we most wanted, we had to totally re-engineer the way that we are doing everything. And boy, did that not point to some things and make us realize, why have we not been doing this before? Or why are we doing that way? The thought of offering virtual information sessions and virtual tours as a mainstay for the student who doesn't have the means to get to us, that could be coming from rural North Carolina or coming from Driggs, Idaho. Why weren't we doing those things? And it just forced us to take just a strong lens and really look at all the things that we were doing. And I'll tell you, Mark, more of that came along in the second, we finished one cycle, obviously in the spring of 20, summer of 20, we enrolled that class. And then we realized, boy, some of this is going to continue on as we were in search of that vaccination. But the real conversation points leading up to this have been, what are the things we want to touch? What do we need to be thinking about? What are some of the biases that we may have in place? What are some of the practices that we have? And who are those practices best serving? Is it us? Or is it the group that we seek to attract to this college? Are we asking things that we don't use, which is an error? So the entire part of our work from a recruitment to an evaluation and selection process, that's the fun part of what you said and what you prefaced all this with. That's what we've been putting under the microscope to say, what are some of those real changes? What are the things we truly believe in? What are the mainstays that we need to keep? But what are those things that are needing some change in our world to go forward?
Well, I know you have a big brain and a lot of experience, but I'm sure you weren't the only one who was a part of the journey and part of the think tank. So who was involved in these discussions? Was this the entire admission office, the senior level? Was it
Did it involve faculty? Did it involve administration? Like who became a part of this discussion when you wanted to broaden it out beyond just going virtual more?
To the credit of this admission and financial aid team, it's right here. It is right here in terms of looking, because these are the folks on this college campus that have their ear to the ground better than anyone. These are the folks that are working with different subsets of students all across this country, all around this world. And we're able to understand on that spectrum of any question you want to put on it, what are the differences and what are the things we need to be cognizant of. So did I speak about this with our president, Carol Quillen, and state, this is a goal for us. This is a goal for us. This is a goal that I am putting down in my review to say, 1 year from now, hold my feet to the fire to say, what have you changed and what have you had the ability to do? Will we have support of a faculty admission committee that works with us and serves as in an advisory capacity? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, we will. And they've been beautifully supportive. These are the things that we should think of. But there's also a trust level in the work that we are doing, which I'm very, very fortunate to have, and I don't take for granted. But it's been this team. It's been this team that is also, we pride ourselves on being current, Mark, and looking at that marketplace and, each and every day, what's in the Chronicle, what's in Inside Higher Ed,
Sure,
what are other
sure.
people talking about, what are schools talking about, so we can be aware. And that's what's really shaped this. Sorry, long answer to that, but that's where it's come from. It's been this team, and I will tell you, as we have started on a number of these things already, we got a lot of contributors in the room, which is fantastic, as we should have a large number of contributors.
That means you hired well. You hired well.
Well, and again, I'm surrounded by fantastic people. They take this work very, very seriously.
So let's dive in. Let's go through some of the ideas that percolated up from those discussions that you said, you know what? You're right. Let's do it. Let's act on this, and let's try to concretize this discussion and move it into a little bit more something that's tangible for people to grasp what we're actually talking about here.
Yeah, let's start with some basic things. Deadline dates. Having a deadline date on January 1st, what does that mean? What does that mean? It means the week between Christmas and New Year's is simply god-awful. That's what it means. And it means that maybe a high school senior is going to get to that New Year's party a little bit later than perhaps they want to. But deadline dates, Mark, is one of them. And I think understanding the landscape this past year and looking at where kids were with the fatigue, living a life in Zoom, remotely, without friends, without the interaction, without the leadership, the service, those things that made them whole. So some easy ones that we've changed and we're holding to our deadline dates.
I chuckled on that. Our regular listeners know I started something really recently, like maybe 3 months ago. Every fifth episode, I call it Stuck's Rant, Stuck's Rave. So I praise something out there, and then I go off on something. And what did I
hope
go
to
off?
God that when the fifth comes up, if you're coming back to this episode, I hope we're in the rave.
Well, the reason why I'm laughing is my last rant was schools that have January 1st ED2 deadlines. Are you really trying to blow people's Christmas out? And I did mention Davidson was January 2nd at the time I looked. Have you changed it, or did you move it from the first to second?
And just giving the folks the time, because we're not going to do anything with them, on those dates. And it's also, instead of holding to a date, we can move those things around. When students are making reference to that, they're using ComMap, they're using Coalition, they're using different tools that help them understand when things are due. So with thousands and thousands of colleges out there, it's not like we have some sacred dates like an April 1 that is no longer a sacred date, or a May 1 that I guess has returned to being a little bit more of one. So we've moved it to those dates to give them the weekend. I'm not going to be sitting here waiting for it on Friday night for the thing to come in. So there's some simple ones.
Was it any other deadline besides the ED2 deadline you changed, or was that it?
What we also did is we changed the date when we released.
Oh.
When we released, we gave ourselves some extra time. So we were going to be releasing around March 20th, and we pushed it back a week to give ourselves time. But Mark, also having become a test optional school, we knew that we were going to take some greater time in our evaluation to identify strengths in different ways. And as a result, we wanted and we needed some more of that time. But here's a different thing. Asking the students to share with us a list of books that you have read in the last year, and of those books that you read, how many of them were for your course work? How many of them happen to be for your free reading? Well, some students have greater capacity to do that. In some homes, that's more of a norm. And as a result, we realized, what are we doing with it? We complimented a student and thought, wow, that's a great book that they've read. If they were competing for some type of a scholarship from time to time, we might make reference, to, hey, why did you read that? Or what did you think of the protagonist in that book? But otherwise, Mark, it wasn't something that was really differentiated. And we appreciated that there are going to be impacts upon that type of a question. So what did we do? We got rid of it. We removed it. We thought that, that could be a stumbling block. And could that have been forcing students to say, I haven't read that many. I haven't read any. My life outside of school is I get my work done and I'm caring for my family, because the fact that I am in a single parent home, or I could be in a 2-parent home, but my job doesn't allow me to be doing that. So it's looking at that as an example. It's just one question of many that we put under the microscope and said, let's get it out. Let's get it out. Yeah. We're going to learn about who these students are in other parts of an application, and we can probably learn about them better and level some playing fields. So 2 quick examples.
Great. Yeah. So basically what I'm hearing you say is, was there a class bias that was built into that question that, we would be better off without it? We can have many, many ways to discern who can come here, do our program, excel. But was that question is creating a bias, then let's get rid of it. And did you make any other changes to your application at all, or was that?
Yeah, there's been, some nuances that relate to questions, some nuances that relate to, Mark, we know well, there are going to be some schools where the thought of getting teacher recommendations, that's going to be a tough thing. So opening up some of the parameters by, this is what we're looking for. These are folks that you can get this from. For those that are going to be more challenged in order to receive that type of an additional external or internal evaluation, depending on where it's coming from. So a broadening in terms of what we're going to view as acceptable. Changing, again, just some of the prompts for some of these short answers to be more inviting, to where we've tinkered with some of them in the past where we thought that we've lost some students. What drove some of this was looking at completion rates.
Sure.
And who are some of the students that we're losing to the wayside? Who can I see out there on these application portals that aren't completing? And knowing that the only thing you had yet to do was complete the supplement. So it was pointed to things that we were doing and rules that we were making that just need not happen.
Did you see an increase in completion rates?
Mark, not yet, because these are things that are all going to are being worked on for this upcoming cycle. So these are things that we've been talking about and putting great emphasis on really since we completed our cycle. And as colleges and universities, they get to the end of March, they release their decisions. You go into yielding mode. But part of what you're also doing is thinking, let's not lose sight of what we just went through over these last 4 or 5 months relative to this review. What are the things that we liked? What are the things that we want to keep? What are our mainstays? And what are we disappointed with as well? In light of changes that we've made, what are things that we should be thinking about right now? And in case we had any change in personnel, let's capture them. And the completion rates were one of those things that were just really getting under our skin. Why are we losing those students? And it was more often coming with students that are coming by way of under-resourced schools, some students that are underrepresented, some more than others. So as a result, we said, let's dive into this.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, the recommended resource for episode 220 is a brand new book called The Attack on Higher Ed, and the subtitle is The Dissolution of the American University. The book talks about how American higher ed is under attack today like never before. It's under attack by a right-wing narrative that portrays academia as costly, corrupt, and irrelevant, and a threat to the country and to students. It's under attack by budget cuts. It's under attacks on the liberal arts and on humanities disciplines. It talks about faculty layoffs and the corporatization of education. It talks about how campus closings and mergers are accelerated over the last decade. And the author of the book is Ronald Busto, and what he does, he draws on the precedent comparing what's happening now in higher ed to Henry VIII's dissolution of the British monasteries in the 1530s. And he shows how there's a confluence of forces like innovation, authority, and separateness that are enabled the monasteries to succeed, and then suddenly, unexpectedly, they just failed. And it talks about how higher ed's central role in American culture and economy, and that a powerful anti-liberal narrative is severely damaging its reputation with parents, voters, politicians. Musto's a historian. He's taught at multiple universities, and he offers a comprehensive account in this book, as well as some new ways to restore the image of higher education. The book is available in both paperback and Kindle, and it just came out in 2022. We'll now return to my interview with Chris Gruber.
Yeah, there are so many things that you're speaking to that are all kinds of sirens in positive way are going off in my mind. One thing that I think is challenging, and I understand the value to it, is the why us essay. I've sat in mock admissions committees, and I've seen how not getting a good answer to that question can really ding you in the process. And even when I followed up with college admissions counselors, sometimes they've said, just didn't see the greatest why us essay. Well, here's the thing I know about that. That is probably the most coachable thing that you can do. And I have a really super smart kid. They don't give me a good why us essay the first time. But when you point out a few things, that thing goes from a C to an A with a little bit of coaching. And so that's something that I like admission offices to just think about a little bit. I get the value of they get us, they understand us. It feels like a match. But boy, that is one place where having quality coaching makes all the difference in the world. Any thoughts on that, Chris? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's one of the ones that we've played with. And I can paraphrase very, very quickly. Why Davidson? Well, I've always been dreaming of going to a college located about 20 miles outside of a major metropolitan city on about 600 acres, located in a small village. Oh my God, come on, that smells like, sounds like, reads like the opening part of any view book. So what we did is, instead of just saying why Davidson, we've changed that to, come on, there are 4,000 colleges and universities in this country. Why is Davidson on your list? And maybe that sounds like you didn't change a lot, but we're trying to have an understanding as to, with great intentionality, you checked our box. Mm-hmm. What is it about this place?
Sure.
Why are we on the list? Why are we on the list? So what we're hoping to receive is some of that greater intentionality and why the box was checked, for us, and what resonates in a student's world that they want to be a part of, that is part of their current makeup, the attributes that they possess that are going to be only have the chance to flourish while they're here. So we're just trying to, these are these things that are work in progress.
Sure.
You think of the guy at the back of the concert with all those slides. Are we going to get it right up to an A+, as you've said? What we're trying to do, Mark, is we're trying to get higher grades across the board. So when we look at what that mean grade is at the end, we're going to say, I think students are doing a better job in understanding what they're looking for, but also having an appreciation of what they are going to find here. Why do you want to be here? And I'd love to see them talking more about, here comes the coaching, talking about the people they found, the people that they've met, the observations that they've made when they were here visiting or on a virtual program or diving through a website, conversation that they had with a recent grad or somebody who was a member of their religious faith and spoke to them one day after a service.
Sure.
those are the things that we want to hear, because that, I think, is going to be creating that greater connection. But you're right. It can be a coachable thing, but that answer can still apply to lots and lots and lots of places. And that's what we're trying to tailor just a little bit.
Sure. Were there any other things you looked at where you felt social class maybe is more of a barrier than we would like it to be, and where you feel like you went in the direction of access with anything that you did?
Yeah, and without giving away the secret sauce formulas and all, as we evaluate and we're looking to contextualize where a student is coming from, there are lots of ways that one would describe a secondary school that a student comes from. You've got the name of place, you've got where it's located, you've got the percentage of students that are moving on to four-year colleges and universities, which tends to be something that can weigh heavily on the minds of schools. And what can be assumed with that? It's going to be a level of preparation. Does that number alone indicate by chance really how well a student is going to be prepared? We're challenging that.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Looking at the curriculum. And because let's be honest about that, Mark, kids don't have a choice of where they are going to be. Well, some kids have a choice of where they are going to be. And maybe they select a magnet or a select school or an application school in their town district. Obviously, there's the independent, there's the boarding, but that's not for all.
Parents are heavily involved in those decisions too. So
absolutely. And as a selfish parent that I am, boy, I would have missed my kids, all three of them. There were times where I would have liked them to have been elsewhere, but but looking at that, looking at an understanding of curriculum that is offered and shifts that are being made with that, putting into check observations that are being made between I've got AP, I've got IB, I've got dual enrollment. I've got dual enrollment where a student then goes to another location in order to take those. Some that are by way of school, some that are saying, oh, we've done away with that. So we're looking at that to say, can we understand differences in terms of one's preparation, preparedness, and really put some of the assumptions that we have in check to see going forward, what do we need to be doing? And could there be some changes to some of the internal rubrics and some of the categorizing that we have used that are conversation points that are not the drivers of decisions, but are conversation points that we can put some statistics with to state going forward, this is how we should be thinking of those things. So that's a big one for us.
I mean, I'm sure you're familiar, Ross Chetty's research, the 38 colleges that have more kids from the top 1% income than the bottom 60. And then he got access to those 20 million tax returns when he was at Stanford. And that's eye-opening. And I know, as someone who's in my 22nd year doing this, kids that make it through the process of highly selected private schools, there is such a strong class advantage that you have every step of the way, right? Like whether it's the best, of course, we moved into the best suburban schools. Who would not want to do that for their kids, or whether it's private or public, or whether it's tutoring, or whether it's whether working the sports angle from the time your child is really young to be able to have an athletic hook. Just the advantage of having educated parents. And what does that mean with the conversations they see and the models they're exposed to and the travel that happens and all of that? So I have always felt like schools, this is in general, highly selective private schools, they talk a really good game of how they look at students in context, but I don't feel they're compensating enough for class advantages. Because I'll give you an example. I podcast co-host Dr. Dave Williams, lifelong friend. His daughter's at Yale. He's highly educated. Princeton undergrad, Harvard MD, Northwestern. His wife's got a medical degree from Northwestern. And his daughter went to the lab school, and she's at Yale. And you know what he says to me? When I walk around and I see all the black kids at Yale, I don't see very many people from South Chicago. I see a lot of kids that went to places like the lab school. And that's my experience as well. And so if I feel like you're looking at that and saying, we don't always have to do things the way we've always done them.
I love your story. I love your sharing of that. And we've got This team of admission officers, Mark, that I am fortunate to call colleagues and I'm fortunate to call friends, and in many ways, while I carry perhaps the senior number of years on the team, don't get me wrong, I learned so much from them each and every day. And we are looking to advocate for those that need that. What your friend was saying is, his daughter ended up at a great place. She was well prepared. There are lots of people that are going to have those same types of experiences because we're finding them where they are and we're recognizing strengths. And I wish the needle could move faster, but we're going to keep pushing that needle and we're not going to let off of it. So I'm proud of that part. I really am. It's not perfect. It's never going to be a done work. It's never going to be, when we were doing some strategic planning a few years ago, it was going to be, paint dried, paint done, no, it's always going to be wet. And we're going to keep pushing it.
And I'm glad you specifically mentioned looking at the school profile, making inferences from the percentage of kids that go to four-year colleges. Because what does it say for the person that goes to a school where, let's say, 20% of people go to four-year colleges? Like, it says a lot about them if they're able to sort of surmount that educational milieu and still be in the range of a competitive applicant, right? Like, I've always felt so much credit should be given for them for how they've exceeded their educational environment that they're in.
Spot on. What are the ways that you can define strength for that person? Is test optional going to help them? And in some cases, perhaps it may. I think in some ways it can. But that's the type of student that we want to be finding and to get here and to have an understanding for, number one, what are the ways in which we believe that they are going to do well on this campus? But then part of our job as well is, as we look at the demographic of the student that is going off to college today, come on, Mark, you can talk about this. What goes on within the Southeast and the growth that is still coming along in the Southeast versus the other three quadrants. There's a lot of change going on. And that makeup of students, the needs of what we're going to need to provide as a college community is going to be changing all the time. What do we need to change that person that you just meant? What do we need to have in terms of support system for those students that are coming here because they haven't had some of those exposures by being at a school where only 20% have moved on to a four-year education? Those are the ways where we need to learn and help that student. I never want to just admit a student. People say, oh, opening day, it's your favorite day. All the students that you've admitted, they arrive here. My favorite day is graduation day, because the fact that if we did our job right and this community did their job right and the student, met the task, that's the day. I want to see them graduate in 4 years.
Yeah. Well, you guys have a good four-year graduation record. I know you can always get better, but that's always been a strong suit for Davidson.
Yeah. So, but I love your example. And those are the kids that need to be found. They're going to add a lot to this community. They're going to add an awful lot.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, I'm here with Kevin Newton, back again. He's our international expert. How are you, Kevin?
I'm doing great, Mark. How are you?
Good. I'm really excited. Kevin approached me with this idea of doing a spotlight on the Netherlands, on Dutch universities. And boy, I love our new all-college spotlight feature that our webmaster, Stalionos, has put up on our website. But it's kind of embarrassing. Right now we have 105 spotlights, which I'm kind of proud of. But we have 3 in the international bucket. So we're relying on you, Kevin, to fill some gaps and holes where you have expertise and I know that we don't. So where do you want to start? Kick it off.
Well, I think because my idea is we'll probably come back to Dutch universities at some point more specifically.
Sure.
But I'd just like to give a brief overview because in my experience, what happens is people get the idea that they maybe going abroad's right for their kid. And they look at the UK or they look at Ireland and it's a little expensive. And they hear all these rumors about free university in Germany and then realize that if their kid doesn't speak German, that's a bit of a problem. So the Netherlands tends to be one of those places that people end up looking at. The cost is quite a bit lower. In some cases, it's as little as 4,000 euros a year, sometimes even lower than that, depending on your program. Many programs are English language, are taught in the English language, but there's a few differences that kind of can scare people off and cause some apprehension. And I think those are worth talking about.
Remind us again, Kevin, how does 4,000 euros translate to dollars?
As of today, it's about $4,400 to $4,800. So,
okay.
I've not looked at the exchange rate this week, and as we're recording this, there's a lot of fluctuation in global markets.
Sure, of course. So even if so that would be basically your tuition cost, right?
Correct.
Your course of study, and I'm sure it may vary from school to school, but when you're looking at room and board, is that comparable to? Can you kind of explain what it become? Is it going to be more like an NYU? Some of the schools here stateside can get as high as 21, 22 on room and board. Some of the Cal States actually are some of the most expensive ones, and then some of your really expensive cities. Are you looking at price point like that, or more like state schools, which can be in kind of 9 to 14, 15? I mean, what are you seeing out there on that side?
It definitely depends on how should I put this, the standard to which your child has become accustomed to or will expect.
Sure.
So you can easily spend $25,000 a year on room and board, but a more realistic number is about the same as a state school. Obviously, living in downtown Amsterdam is going to be more expensive, but the flip side of that is that a lot of the universities in Amsterdam are not located downtown, and there's excellent public transit. So there's definitely something for everyone. It's just the hard part is finding exactly what that something is and making sure that it's the best fit for you and your child.
No, this is great. I just thought about something. We always have first-time listeners, and for those of you who may fit in that category, Kevin Newton is an expert in international universities. That's exclusively what he works with. He has a company called An Education Abroad. We partner with him at School Match for You because it's not something that we do other than U.S. and Canada. And he's agreed to come on once a quarter and give us an overview of an international university. And this is, I think, your third one, if I remember correctly.
I think third sounds about right.
Awesome. I never want to assume everybody, like Kevin Newton, that's E.F. Hutton. Everybody knows who Kevin Newton is. Don't want to make that assumption.
One day, maybe. One day.
Maybe. So where do you want to take it?
Well, I think that the first thing to do is let's talk about a view from 10,000 feet about Dutch universities. And the first thing you'll instantly notice when you Google them is the fact that they're great. 7 of the top 100 global universities are in the Netherlands. And when you've got a population of, I can't remember Holland or the Netherlands population off the top of my head, but it's certainly hitting well above its weight when it comes to top 100 universities. Now, none of them are going to be in that top 10 that the UK, the US, and Switzerland seem to have a firm command of real estate on. But definitely towards that middle 40 to 60 range, you're going to start seeing a lot of Dutch universities. And there's a lot of diversity here. If you want a university that's got a campus that's devoted to the sciences and has got partners in industry, the Dutch have that. If you want something that's in a college town where 25% of the people in the city are university students, the Dutch have that. So depending on what you want, you can typically find a pretty good fit in the Netherlands.
Quick question. Our listeners know I've kind of trained people to throw out the precision of rankings and create your own customized rankings because only you know what you're looking for. And every ranking has a formula, and no formula is going to line up exactly with your values. But are you referring to, when you say that, are you using like the QS World University Rankings? Is that like your kind of standard you're referring to? Or because obviously there's all kinds of different rankings and they have different schools pegged.
The two that I use most are the QS or the Times Higher Education Supplement.
Okay.
As a general rule, I stay away from the US News rankings simply We'll get any IEC started on the U.S. News rankings sometime.
Sure. Just curious.
And I think that's the underlying message here is there's going to be a place for most different types of students. And depending on what you want, you're going to find a place that academically excels. Now, the first thing you're likely to notice, and this is one of those things that causes some level of confusion, is that the Dutch universities tend to have two different types of universities. There are the universities, and then there are the universities of applied sciences, or the applied universities. And these have two different kind of goals. And kind of the closest thing I can relate it to is if you go back decades to the original University of California Master Plan for Education, the universities are like the UCs. They're the ones that are going to be expected to produce future researchers. And whereas the applied science universities are the ones who are going to be expected to educate accountants or teachers or something like that. Now, just like the UCs, or the University of California system, that's gotten a little fuzzy over the last few years. But what it means for Americans applying abroad is that you're going to start seeing these acronyms thrown around. I'm going to avoid trying to say them in Dutch because my Dutch is horrendous.
Thank you. If your Dutch is horrendous, what do you think mine is? You might be cussing at me over there and I won't even know it.
It is not a language that I have gotten to on Duolingo yet. But you'll start to see WO degrees versus HBO degrees. And the easy way to remember that is WO degrees kind of are the why. Those are the ones taught by the universities, whereas HBO degrees are the how. So remember H for how. And those are the ones taught at the applied science or the applied universities.
So do these different, universities offer different sets of majors, or is there overlap?
There's considerable overlap because if you take something like business, you may have somebody who wants to specialize in developing new types of finance or to do research within management. And that would definitely be a WO degree program. Whereas somebody who wants to do their time and go get a job would be more of an HBO program. Now, in the Netherlands...
HBO as in like the TV network HBO?
Exactly.
Oh, that's easy to remember. Even for someone that doesn't watch movies like me.
So in the Dutch system, you've got to have a WO degree to go on to a master's degree. You can get a conversion course of a year to convert your HBO degree to prepare you for that master's degree level course, but not everyone's going to want a master's degree. A lot of people want to get their college degree and go on with their professional lives. A couple of other differences, an HBO degree tends to be a bit slower paced and a bit more focused on making sure that you've digested all the material. So if you feel that you need a little extra help, there's no problem in doing it, or no shame in an HBO degree. They're viewed as equal, just different.
Do you find students you're working with pretty early in the process need to get in a lane? Like either you get in the WO lane or you get in the HBO lane, or do you find that they can cross-apply to both, or they cross-apply, to both sets of schools?
You can definitely do both. And what I typically encourage is if a student's more competitive to take a look at the WO degree simply because they may want to go on to graduate school. And that's getting you more exposure to that research that makes those top 100 universities, because it's not just the big research universities that are top 100, it's some of these smaller schools as well.
So I assume that the admission standards are more stringent for the WO versus the HBO based on what I'm hearing. Is that a fair assumption or not?
They are, but at the same time, for a lot of Americans, they're still definitely within reach. So an HBO degree, and I'm speaking very broadly here, so there are going to be some exceptions, but in fact, there are probably going to be more exceptions.
You're already whetting my appetite for you to come back and talk about an individual school, but I'm not going anywhere, so we have plenty of time for that.
If you apply pretty broadly, or if you're, say, someone who's got a typical American high school diploma, you've done well above a 3.0, but maybe you don't have a bunch of AP classes. Maybe all of this talk about AP classes that we've been doing about other universities has put you off from applying abroad, but you still want that international education. An HBO degree is the degree for you. Again, and there could very well be more exceptions than schools that follow it, but at the same time, it's a good baseline guideline, is that an HBO program wants a 3.0 from an American high school. Now, they want to make sure you've taken challenging courses, so honors level courses, that sort of thing. Now, something we've noticed consistently, I think it's been a bit of a theme, is other universities, including the universities that have a WO type degree, they don't always have a lot of respect for the typical American high school diploma. What they do have a lot of respect for are AP tests and the IB diploma. So if you've got 3 AP tests with scores of 3, 4, or 5, you're competitive for an XO diploma, or an XO degree, excuse me.
So I have a question for you on that, Kevin. Do they not respect a typical diploma because they found there's so much grade inflation in this country? So, like, sometimes I talk to schools, and this kind of frustrates me, but they just go whatever GPA is on the transcript, because they say, look, there's 43,000 high schools out there. We can't possibly manage them all. To me, they're being lazy, but that's, and I shouldn't say that because a lot of schools are undermanned with admission officers, but they're taking the easy way out would be a better way of putting it. So I could see them saying that, or I could also see them saying that they just like the standardization of, like, we know AP curriculum, we know IB curriculum, we know what a 5, 6, 7 is in higher level or standard level IB, we know what a 3, 4, 5 or 2 is on AP, and so we kind of know what. I guess both of them are kind of saying the same thing. You know what you're getting, but to me they're a little bit different, right? One is it's not like we, and the other option is we just think our education is better than the American education. So in general, we don't have a lot of respect for American diplomas. So it could be a lot of different reasons, I guess, why they could feel that way. And I'm curious which one it would be.
I think it's a mix of the first two and maybe just a dash of the last one.
Okay.
Those WO programs that definitely, like I said, it's a bit of a combination of there's 40,000 plus high schools here in the U.S. And whereas an American university may or may not be expected to know all those for the thousands of applicants it gets every year, a Dutch university that may get less than 100 just can't be expected to. And also they know that when you're doing the WO degree, you're jumping in the deep end with a subject. There's not going to be as much hand-holding, so they want to see that you've got that ability to move forward.
Sure. Well, why would you not be able to go from HBO to WO? I mean, for a master's. It's something with the Dutch system. So there are cases where somebody with an HBO degree can apply outside of the Netherlands. Okay. Typically, when this is done, it's when you've got some work experience and you're applying towards a business degree. Okay. So, for example, if you wanted to have an HBO level degree or an applied sciences degree, and then come back to the United States and apply for an MBA. Now, someplace like the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School of Business probably knows enough about the Dutch universities to know the difference. But sure, a lot of places are going to see that an HBO degree is very similar to a lot of programs here in the U.S., whereas that WO degree is more with honors, with independent research. So it's not that it shuts down that door forever, but definitely within the Dutch system, they want to make sure that you're ready to do independent work and at some level of independent research before you move on. So does the term apply, does that just refer to like practical, like it's education that's going to prepare you for a job in the real world? Yes. So that would be like most degrees here. Most degrees here are not preparing people to go be researchers. Right. That's like 1%, if that, of the population that goes on to do research. Right. It's... Everybody's a scholar like you, Kevin. Well, I think about it, you say that, I think of my wife's family, for example. My brother-in-law and his wife have degrees in construction management and healthcare management, which prepared them for those jobs, and they do very well for themselves. Sure. I have a degree in history and Middle Eastern studies, and my wife has a degree in political science and English literature. Right.
And I'm an ardent defender of the liberal arts. So, or else I would be a gigantic hypocrite for having studied history and Middle Eastern studies. But,
Yeah, and I am too, by the way.
it's a different fit for different people. Now, speaking of the liberal arts, I just want to finish up the discussion on admissions with the fact that, once again, it's not a holistic process. You apply given your academic performance, and because acceptance rates really don't play into any kind of rankings, you're either in or you're not. If you've met the guidelines, in most cases you're in. Now, there are exceptions because a lot of these places have rather open enrollments. Their thought is it doesn't cost them anything extra to have another student studying business or law. The place where this changes is where there's going to be a lot of costly applications. So it may not cost too much extra to educate another future lawyer. It costs a lot more to educate a future doctor. So medical schools, engineering schools, these are places that are more likely to have a capped enrollment, as are some of the top business programs, simply because they've got some level of internships that they want to make sure everyone gets and that sort of thing. But since we were on the subject of the liberal arts, something that the Dutch universities have been pushing the last decade or so is this concept of a university college, which, if you're a little more unsure about what you want to study, it could be the fit for you. And this lets you go in and, a lot like an American university, choose a major, some cases even choose a minor, but still take courses in surrounding areas. So it's something that there's a number of trade-offs with this. The University of Amsterdam probably has the one of the most respected university colleges in the Netherlands, aptly named Amsterdam University College. And you take courses at the University of Amsterdam as well as at Amsterdam University, or within the faculties of the University College. And there are some trade-offs here. You may not get all of the research opportunities that you might get elsewhere, but at the same time, you're getting a more well-rounded education. And especially when you start picking and choosing your courses like that, you may run into the situation where your third year, or if you're doing an HBO degree, those are 4-year degrees typically. WOs are 3 years. Your third or fourth year, you may be taking a class in Dutch or German or French, simply because the Netherlands long ago realized that Dutch was not going to be the language to conquer the business world. I don't think it's seriously thought that since the 17 or 1800s. And again, 95% of the population speaks English, but a significantly high part of the population also speaks French or German.
Next week in the news, does calculus count too much in college admissions? Scott Jasek, Inside Higher Ed, with Ron Lieber of the New York Times. Our question from a listener is, how common is it on today's campuses that they give quote-unquote credit for AP/IB, but still require a distribution requirement in the same subject area? I'm trying to minimize unnecessary stress for my kid. Bobby from Ohio. And our question number 2 is, Victoria applied early admission to Auburn. We thought it would be an easy yes with her 4.7 unweighted GPA after senior year. However, she applied test optional because her score is 1260 on the SAT. Auburn deferred her. The college counselor at our school and I were completely shocked when they did not accept her. Our college counselor called the admissions officer for our area. She said they did not look at anything except grades and test scores. They did not consider anything else in the application. The Auburn admissions officer encouraged Victoria to send in her test scores. She said her full file would be considered for admission in March. She has not sent her scores yet, but she plans to this week. In hindsight, Victoria remembers our tour guide at Auburn in July, hinting that Auburn says it is test optional, but not really. She didn't say it that way, but Victoria realizes now that was meant what she meant. Victoria sent in her scores in late February and was accepted on March 4th. Unfortunately, the delay caused her to miss out on Auburn scholarship opportunities. How common is this? We wish we had known they were not really test optional. Melinda from North Carolina. And our third question is, are all hooks equal, or do some count more than others? How can we know which ones count the most? That's an anonymous question asker. Our interview is the final part 2 of 2 with Chris Gruber, the Vice President and Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Davidson College, on, quote, how the pandemic forced Davidson to examine its own admission biases and make changes. And our college spotlight is the final part 2 of 2 on understanding Danish universities with international specialist Kevin Newton.
And friends, remember, it's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there, and it's what you do when you get out of there. And college is not a prize to be won, but a match to be made. I was talking to Dave last time. I said, hey, what do you think about me saying that in the end? And he said, yeah, it's like same bat time, same bat channel. So I just feel like repetition, hopefully. I want that ringing in every student and parent's ears all the time. College is not a prize to be won, but a match to be made. It's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there and what you do when you get out of there. See you next week, everybody. Same time.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe so you get every episode as soon as it is released. If you are interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. And you can write a review for us on your favorite podcast listening app. I am the producer of the Your College Bound Kid podcast. We have a fantastic team of 9 people. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. David Williams and Dr. Lisa Ruff. Our sound engineer who fixes all of our many errors is Nemanja Motvich. The amazing music you hear is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Dalianas Dimitri. If you want to have a college coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want to ask, or a college you want Lisa or me to do a spotlight on, or if you have a recommended resource or an article you think we should share, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you, our family, next week.